All right, so tonight we're going to talk about The Girl Singer by Marianne Worthington. And some of us were just realizing that this book won an award today. Oh, the Weatherford, is that what it was?
Mhm.
Weatherford
Yes.
Award, which is for Appalachian works
Nice.
from perhaps Berea College. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think it's
anyway, we can,
book.
and she's going to join us at 8 o'clock tonight. And so we can all congratulate her on that new award for this book. So I really like this book a lot.
Mhm.
What do y'all think about the cover?
Well, I think it speaks to the time of when the book was, the poems were written. That's what I thought.
Yeah, because it looks like, well, it's a female playing a guitar, and it looks
Yeah.
like a not modern dress.
Right. And okay, so this is something that has just recently come up from something I've been doing, but I liked the cover. I thought it was like Helga. I thought it worked with the poems and all of that. And then this weekend I was involved in a series of discussions about writers being appropriate for all people. And so then I wondered whether the cover might not welcome some people to pick it up. It might not welcome people of a different gender, of a different color. So, which is troublesome because I wouldn't want to judge a book by its cover, because it does. I mean, the cover goes beautifully with the poems and what the poems are about and what the time it represents and all of that. But again, you do want people to pick up your book.
Yes.
So I just had that thought after this whole weekend experience that I just had. Before that, I didn't think about it at all, but I wouldn't, because it's everything I am. So
Yeah. And
It's
we
not-
all do judge the covers, right? If it's aesthetically pleasing or something that we can relate to, we're more likely to pick it up than something that doesn't speak to our, our aesthetics or our beliefs or whatever. So I think every book, I don't know that you can be so universal that you're going to attract everybody. I don't know, unless your cover is like an abstract piece of art or something. I don't know.
Well, like I said, it didn't occur to me at all until.
Yeah, but that's such an interesting point.
That's one thing about country music too. It was not that diverse in that time period, and it is only now starting to have more diversity.
Well, with a lot of the poems are set in the past anyway, so it seems that it would fit.
Yeah.
The poems themselves, and to speak to your point, KB, that would be an interesting question to ask. Those who are involved in the process of helping pick the cover of a book. Not every press. I mean, sometimes the press is the one that does that, not the poet. But I would think that most poets would, if they're involved in the process of picking the book cover, they're really thinking about the poems themselves and how it resonates with the poems, and maybe a private kind of personal affection or resonance with the cover, and maybe not even really thinking about who's picking up the book.
Right. No, I agree. I'm somebody showed me a possible cover for my next book, and now I'm rethinking it because I'm thinking, well, I don't want to,
Is your book cover figurative? Because I mean, it's pretty much only an issue if the book cover is figurative. If it was floral or an object, if she just had a guitar, it wouldn't be. And yet if the cover was more universal, it wouldn't match the poems, maybe.
Yeah,
Mm.
I know. I wasn't even thinking I should bring it up. It was just one of those things that hit me really hard this weekend in a
Mhm.
conversation and a whole series of discussions, so.
Yeah.
You know, the only things that turn me off on covers are the ones that are cookie cutter.
mm,
And you see those more on novels than you do on books of poetry,
True.
where you know that it looks an awful lot like cover X. And that looked a lot like cover Z. Yeah. You know, they don't tell you anything. And they don't seem to have the thought behind them.
Or a
Yeah.
lot of times the cover is just the title, you know, maybe in handwriting or something, but there's no visual for a lot of them.
Well, no, we always begin by talking about covers, and there's probably a really good reason for that. We're trying to figure out exactly what, how does the cover fit the poems themselves, but also, covers play a very important role thematically, or can. Think about a particular presses like Wave books. If you're familiar with Wave books, I probably have something somewhere that is a Wave book. But yeah, are y'all familiar with their books?
Mm-mm.
They're just plain. I mean, seriously plain. And the only thing on the books are the titles and the author's names. Now, occasionally the title might be in a different, direction or font or whatever, but it's just mostly beige, a beige cover, but it's distinctive. I mean, that's probably branding on their part. There's something about that. Every time you're like, that. Oh, I know what press did that book. Just
Right.
as in the old days ago, when New Issues Press came out with a book, there was a similarity in all of them, and you knew it. And I wouldn't even have to know whose book it was or anything, except I just saw the cover and I realized, hey, that's New Issues Press.
But you would have to be familiar with that, because I think any person who is just going through, if I were a newbie to poetry and I didn't know that and I saw a plain beige cover, I wouldn't pick it up. I'll be
Me
honest
neither.
with you.
I would not either.
I mean, I love this cover, don't get me wrong. It's
Yeah.
one of those things that's now I'm thinking about.
Right.
One of the things that always gets me with covers is the actual font or type used. If they make it too cursive-y or too hard to read, it turns me off, because I want to see an idea of what's in the cover, in the book by the cover. And if you can't even read the name of the book easily, that book I'm probably going to put down.
I agree, Sharon. And this one is very readable, and it's interesting shape in the line of the guitar. And the poems comes back up the other side. Yeah. Well, we'll ask her if she got to pick the cover. Somehow I think she did, but I don't know
I
for
think
sure.
so
This
too,
is a-
because she thanked somebody for it, if I remember reading.
Maybe that's where I saw. So this is cover
Care to make it
illustration.
interesting? we could have a pot of money based on this or something.
A bet. Okay. Well, moving on then. I'm always interested in how the book is put together, cover being one of them. Thinking about the art of the book, how it all works together. So this book has 3 sections with one poem, one beginning poem outside of those sections. The sections don't have titles, but they're very easily grouped, right? There, I mean, you can tell their subject is very tight within each section.
3 books for the price of 1.
Yeah, really. And I enjoyed them separately, but I also enjoy them together. So the first section is a lot about the country music.
Yeah.
Feminism is in there too a lot. And then section 2 seems to be more about her family and more personal poems. And then 3, more about nature. There's a lot of birds, like birds. I think
Yeah.
pop
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Almost all of these poems have some mention of birds,
Birds. Yeah.
which is interesting. Appalachian nature, natural.
I felt because of, just having a different upbringing, that to really understand the first section, I would have had to do a little more research, and I don't know that much about country music, especially not,
Early.
retro country music. And I didn't know, the book notes in the back helped, but that was one section. It was more obscure for me because wasn't my world. But the second section, especially the part about the grandparents, I spent a lot of childhood with old people, so that resonated for me. And then of course all the nature poems I loved.
That's one of the reasons I really liked that first section, because I don't know a lot about country music or the history of it. And reading this, I want to know more. And I think that's something that it's inviting us to do. It's giving us just enough so we can look it up and research it ourselves if we are so inclined. And if not, I think it gives us enough, especially with the footnotes or the endnotes. But I really like learning about things. And I love the way the narratives are they're just really well put together. So many great lines and images. But I mean, with like you, Kathleen, I'm also not familiar, but it makes me want to go out and start researching some songs now, history.
I was always fascinated by the Lomax collection, and I loved the way she brought in variation on a traditional ballad,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
you
That
had
was
the real story of something that happened that outballads ballads with Tom and those 3 foster girls.
yeah.
Yeah, a lot of cheating hearts in that first section.
Yeah, there are, but it also, I knew when I first saw Dula, I thought of Hang Down Your Head, Tom, Dooley, which was, very popular song when I was young. And then to find out that was a connection from her
Yeah.
footnotes was interesting.
I read that in the Appalachian dialect that doula was pronounced dooley. So that's where the song came from.
Okay.
It's the same story.
If any of you would like a field trip, Bristol, Virginia has a museum about the birthplace of country music. And it has a lot about the Carters that were in here
Yeah.
and their Virginia origins.
Isn't there a Carter family fold up somewhere near Johnson City or something?
It's in Virginia. Yeah, not too far from Bristol.
Well, I'm named after Waylon Jennings, so that's my middle name, Waylon. So the country music aspect of this, yeah. I don't know if I should broadcast this to the world, but yeah, Jeffrey Waylon Harden. As I like to tell, I met him years ago and told him I was named after him. I said, "You're my dad's favorite singer. I'm named after you." I was taking a picture with him. He looked at me. He was really tall. He looked at me with what I thought of as a mixture of shock and pity. Like, who would do that to a kid? But yeah, I mean, all the country music stuff in the first section I found very appealing. I mean, hey, any book with Dolly Parton in it is great. And Marty Stewart. I don't know if I what my favorite poem in this book is, but I'm pretty drawn to that Bobby Bear and Marty Stewart poem where Bobby Bear, kisses Marty Stewart goodbye on the Ryman
Oh,
stage.
yeah, yeah.
I thought it was, and then I also loved the way in which poem is it where she, Love in the Cold War. Yeah, Love in the Cold War on page 37, where her parents traveled on their honeymoon and and go to the mother church, and you got little Jimmy Dickens and other people. So that seems like a great way to bring in the family aspect as she's going to move into that next section, which is more family oriented anyway, to kind of tie that in, because even one's family is a kind of church, and country music itself is a kind of church, the mother church, the Ryman Auditorium, and singing, and the way that singing is all these different things. It's the heartbreak of, what is country music? It's heartbreak and praise and hymns, and it's the whole gamut. And it kind of began, and you think about like the Carter family, this family, and then sort of out of that, all of this other kind of music eventually emerges. So
Yeah, and that poem, Love in the Cold War, is a pantoum too, which I absolutely love. That it's a form like that. And there's some sonnets sprinkled in this book too, which I thought was interesting.
I love the one about Patsy Cline, but I'm a Patsy Cline fan. It pulled my heart. Oh, but beyond that, on page 25, the barn dance. Oh, with that little epigraph, little darling's not my name. Oh, and then everything that goes through there is really the way that women were spoken about.
right.
And she's just right. Oh,
Mm.
they had to play like one of the boys.
Yeah. Yeah, and the title poem also speaks to that, to the girl singer.
Yeah.
And she does it really interestingly with the line breaks in the first stanza. This is on page 21. First stanza and second stanza. How hard it was to hold my body against defeat and come to be known as just a girl singer by those men who said, we're doing you a big favor, honey. Like, I love that sprinkling of that deeper subject than just the country music. It's like how women were treated.
Yeah, I dug your grave the better part of last night. Is that a Ralph Stanley song? I think that's Ralph Stanley. And I didn't necessarily look up exactly who the girl singer was in that.
Or is it in the acknowledgement?
It may be in the footnotes, but
borrows lyrics from Dreadful Wind and Rain, the Twa Sisters, Pretty Polly, the Bird. So
Pretty Polly. That's that song. I dug on your grave.
Lyrics from 4 or 5 different songs.
Okay. Well, you think about Dolly Parton kind of starting out with suddenly I'm forgetting his name as we
Porter Wagner.
Yes, thank you, Porter Wagner. She's basically his accompaniment, and of course over time, really, quite frankly, Dolly's Dolly, and what an amazing amount. What an amazing body of work. Really significant body of work. I don't know about these things. Hey, if we're going to give Bob Dylan the Nobel Prize for Literature. I mean, if we're gonna pick anybody from country music to give it to, Dolly, maybe.
She wouldn't
Maybe
accept
maybe
it.
we could finally unite America about everything, like with Dolly.
Yeah. I love her.
Oh yeah. Oh, by the way, I think Madville Publishing is doing a Dolly Parton anthology.
Really?
Yes, yes, and so help me remember. Or I'll have to tell Marianne. She may already know, but we'll make sure she sends her Dolly poem, or more than one Dolly poem, I guess.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
So what did y'all think about the poem on page 8? The one that runs horizontally. A.P. Carter versus Sarah Carter, 1932.
I liked everything about it except that it was horizontal.
It couldn't fit the other way though, I guess.
I know,
Yeah.
I know that. I know that. It's just, I'm OCD that way.
Well, and I thought too,
I loved,
work a little bit. We had to turn the book.
Yeah.
well, it's not that. It's just, you start seeing things all over the page and I go, you know. But it was really good. The echoes in the second column from the first were really good. He's thinking one thing and she's doing another, and
Yeah,
When
I like
when
this
I
one.
read it, I thought, oh, I just thought, damn, I'm reading this whole book. You know what I'm saying? It's just the hook, it's just the hook that made me realize how hard she worked on the book. Not that I didn't think she did, but to throw something different in there like this.
Mhm.
And you know, they talk about a hook in country music songs too. There ain't nothing about you that don't do something for me. You know,
That's right.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Where there's smoke, you'll find my old flame. Stuff, you know, those kinds of hooks in country music.
Yeah, I saw there was some lyric in one of the poems, if you can't stand by me, stand out of the way.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
I love the interplay of these two, these two voices, right? So, and we come down to, I couldn't stop searching for that sound. And then on the other side, I never could make anybody understand.
Mhm.
And I don't know, that's really,
That's really
I mean, it makes you want to try to figure out what the tension is here.
Well, that's at the heart of the girl singer, because
Yeah.
the girl singer had to be everything everybody else wanted her to be, and
Mhm.
keep a kernel of herself to herself. But people didn't look past that surface. This is what the girl singer is.
interestingly
Maybe what
enough,
they wanted them to be.
the acknowledgements say that poem is a contrapuntal poem, particularly inspired by Tyhimbas, Jess's, Leadbelly, Wave Books, 2005.
I've got a copy if you want to go get it. It's over there on the other bookcase.
I was gonna say, it's a lot of take a lot of research to really get all the poems in the first section.
What's amazing is that I know she knew some of it. I'm sure she researched some of it and she distilled it so well that we got the information we needed.
Mhm.
I mean, it's all right there. I mean, so wonderfully put. And if we want to go and do some more research about why there was this here, we
Yeah.
can do that. But we don't have to because it's right there.
Mhm.
Brilliant. It's really brilliant.
And to borrow lyrics means that she listened to these songs enough to pick out particular lines that meant something to her that she could, I mean, that's dedication.
I
Mhm.
imagine she had to get permission too for a lot of it, which is a drag. I mean, you know, that's a lot of work.
Some of this is probably in the public domain by now.
Yeah, let's don't open her up to a lawsuit here. So,
Edit that out.
And I'd almost bet that line.
You muted.
Alice, you went.
Alice, you went on mute there for a moment.
Oh, I would almost bet that the Patsy Cline song came from seeing that letter when they Country Music Hall of Fame did the exhibit on Patsy Cline. Oh, that, you know, on the one hand, you have something sparked by an exhibit. And I did wonder, once you said there was a lot of material about the Carter family in a museum in Bristol, Virginia, Sharon, I'd wondered if that was, you know, part of the sourcing on it.
It could be. And by the way, don't think of it as a little rinky dinky museum. It's a Smithsonian affiliate museum. So it's a really well done place.
I'm heading to Bristol.
We should go on a field trip.
We should.
Jeff and Sandy are taking us on a field trip.
We'll rent a bus. Oh, it'd be great.
We're going to need parental signing off on some of the. Some of y'all look like rebel
Know how
rousers.
to fix them. Anything else on that first section? Should we move to the second section?
Does anybody want to speak to the poem before outside the sections? That was one of my favorites.
Rank Stranger.
Yes.
What did you like about it?
The imagery is just gorgeous. She gives us the beauty side by side with the ugly. And that's something you see a lot of, I think. And we don't appreciate the beauty enough when we're paying attention to the ugly. And sometimes we don't notice the beauty when we're too busy looking, you know, the other way.
Yeah.
It's just like the green and lavender hills smear in the opening ahead as the sun raises the cruel curtain of haze and reveals a colony of turkey buzzards by the roadside. So
Yeah.
we've got that nice, beautiful, you know, image of green and lavender. And then we've got turkey buzzards. I mean, who puts that together? That's great. I mean, and it is, we are surrounded all the time by beautiness and ugliness, and we've got to decide what we're going to look at.
We ran that poem in Flycatcher.
Oh yeah,
Mm,
I love this.
it is. The imagery is fabulous.
How does it work as the beginning poem to this whole book, though?
Well,
No, I
the
mean,
last line of it, oh, sorry.
As to your thoughts.
Go ahead, KB.
The last line of it, the others waiting their turn. And then we start hearing the others, and we're hearing the narratives from each of the other people. And in the first two sections, I think, and then from her in the third section.
I also think in the third stanza, she says, as I hit the highway toward home, and that's what she's really doing in the book. And she mentions her grandmother, and you've got the buzzards and the death, and that's all in the book, you know, the buzzards, the death, and then the pure poetry.
Yeah, I was just going to say the title just makes me, I mean, it's got to be an allusion to the song, Rank Stranger. Clinch Mountain Boys, Ralph Stanley song. And, you know, so if you look, I just went ahead and pulled up the lyrics to that song. Some of you may know it. But it begins by saying, I wandered again to my home in the mountains, where in youth's early dawn I was happy and free. I looked for my friends, but I never could find them. I found they were all rank strangers to me. Everybody I met seemed to be a rank stranger. No mother or dad, not a friend could I see. They knew not my name, and I knew not their faces. I found they were all rank strangers to me. I mean, you know, it keeps on going on from there, but I just assumed that as the first poem, it calls to mind this old song. And, you know, what does that mean? That even the people that you may, you know, like you're going home, but, you know, and what is home? I mean, is it country music? Is it song itself? Is it the, you know, parents at the Grand Ole Opry? I mean, it's a lot of different things, or it can be seen as a lot of different things. And I'm sure there's a lot more to even think about in that the elusiveness, or that's not the right word, in that allusion to that song, the implications of it for this book. And you know, this is totally in a different direction, but you know, when you turn the page, you get index of canticles, right? On page 7. And really wonderful. All these rose names.
Mhm.
And then the very last one in parentheses, I never promised. I really smiled big when I saw that. I was like, oh yeah, I never promised you a rose garden, right?
Yeah.
It's a little echo of that.
And since this one is a list poem, throughout the book, while she doesn't have other poems that are straight lists like this, she uses repetition so well, so strongly, with a list of 2 or 3 things, and then maybe a few lines later, another 2 or 3 things. I didn't mark a poem in the first section that she did that, but I marked one in the last section that she did. Well, on I Will Always Love You, all my favorite local singers are here. The Brewster brothers, Danny Bailey and Gloria Bell, Red and Fred, and a girl from Locust Ridge named Dolly.
Mhm.
You know, and they just are really strong without being overpowering. When she does that, she uses that so well.
Well, let's move to the second section, which are more personal, family oriented.
I love the first one.
Yeah. And she uses my favorite little Southern colloquialism, fixin' to. Fixin' to. That's what my
Isn't it
grandma
interesting?
said.
Isn't it interesting that that poem begins that section, and it's in many ways a kind of collision between an older view of femininity, or the role of a woman, the place of a woman, the way a woman should dress, a grandmother's voice representing that, and then a newer wearing a miniskirt. We've left behind the girl singer who may be playing, you know, the voice underneath a man or accompanying a man. It's someone stepping out in a miniskirt and go-go boots. And the times are changing. This isn't country. This isn't the Patsy Cline, you know, although Patsy Cline probably had some, and we know Loretta Lynn was doing what she did, and not taking names, not necessarily playing second fiddle to anybody. But I guess what I'm saying is, as an opening to that section, it's like it takes the previous section and just clashes it right against
Yeah.
a different thing, a different woman.
Well, and it's interesting too, that last poem in the first section is Love in the Cold War. And there's always a Cold War in a family. isn't there? When the teenagers are trying to grow up and the parents don't want them to, and that clash of generations is kind of a Cold War in the house too.
Mhm.
If the whole book is a country song, the part 2 is the bridge.
Okay.
You know, in the church looming largely in these poems.
I really liked the second poem in that section, Pentecost, 1965. I thought that was, I'm still thinking about that poem. I don't know exactly everything that I should know about it, I think, but it seems as though the element of race gets into this, and uh, there's the line, well, it's in the second stanza. The girl watches for the axe man riding his bicycle down Central Avenue. He's duct taped plastic sheets to dowels, built a shelter so he can ride in all weathers. She likes to read his hand scrawled signs fixed to his bike tent, verses from the Acts of the Apostles. And then that next stanza, at church, the preacher could call him a witness for Jesus, but the axe man is black and poor, ignored. Which it seems to go against the whole. It's like that's contrary to what the church teaches anyway. So even though we see him every day.
Yeah.
So what is Pentecost, at least in a context like this?
Yeah, and juxtaposed with the last line, they were all with one accord in one place, and then it wasn't so on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And not even, I mean, that's the kind of famous statement in the South. What's the most segregated hour of the week? Church.
Right, that's right.
Which doesn't make, I mean, it literally defies logic for people who believe in the ideas of Christianity. There's no way to rationalize that.
So interesting. And I think she, over and over and again, I see these line breaks that she uses that I think are just really, really interesting. And Pentecost has one of those in the first line at the very last stanza. After church, the girls' great feast will be killed, lettuce and onions, side meat and skillet cornbread. The killed really works there.
She does, I know she does that a lot in her poem. She has great line breaks. You think it's going one place and then just keep going and oh, it's somewhere else.
Yeah, she does that very well, I think. I also think another thing she does well is like the musicality in her poems. And you can sense a meter, even though it's not like in your face. Especially like in Kitchen Waltz, did y'all pick up the 3/4 time in the language there? And how lovely that was. Here is the kettle and here is the spoon. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Like a
It was
waltz.
actually hard to read it was hard for me to read because of that actually, because I was stopping with the
Yes, I was too. I
instead
got
of
stuck
following
in
the
the rhythm.
punctuation.
And also, I know we may not be ready to move to part 3 yet, but tree rings as the last poem in section 2 kind of introduces the nature element for part 3. We can grow anywhere, conjuring, avenging, punishing. We are the you adored above all others, screening the doorway between this life and the next.
And so does one of my favorites, the herons on the Holston poem on page 53.
Yes, the birds again. Yeah.
Good one.
What did you like particularly about that poem, Sharon?
The juxtaposition of nature and the things like my mother has settled here, a rest home squatting heavy near the raw edge of a river in a forgotten part of a city. And then she translates that in the last two to what you see with the hallway past the sunroom and laundry moves on to her letting go of her breath and crossing to the window just in time to see the heron. So the whole juxtaposition of the two place settings.
Mhm.
That's in section 2. There are a handful of these kind of smaller poems, or what I think of as smaller poems in comparison to, like the Marty Stewart, Bobby Bear, several pages. But my grandmother's sewing notions on page 44 and once on page 45.
Seven.
I really,
Seven.
I like small poems, and especially that one once. I think is really lovely. War Story on page 47.
That kind of spoke to me. Yeah. Because of the prejudice that just arises and you carry it with you.
Yeah.
Well, if you fought in World War II, you
Yeah.
sure did. My stepdad, he would, no Japanese cards, no Japanese steak. Is this steak Japanese? If it is, I'm not eating it. Yep. World War II veterans.
Interesting.
Oh, Marianne is here.
Oh, good.
So I guess we will let her in. She's here a bit early.
That's okay. Maybe we can spend more time with her.
Yeah.
Well, being a huge bird fan, y'all, I just loved all the birds in the 3rd section. Marianne, we are bragging and bragging about your book. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored that you wanted to talk about it tonight. Thank you.
And we just heard that you won a big award too today.
Yes, the Weatherford Award, which is given by the Appalachian Studies Association and Berea College. And yeah, I just can't believe it.
Congratulations.
You're in good company there with some of those award winners of the past.
Yes, I am. And some of the people who were nominated in poetry were just wonderful. Crystal Wilkinson, Georgella, William
Wow.
Wright, Daniel Lassell, Matthew Wimberly. It's crazy. I just can't believe it. But thank you very much.
Right.
We were just talking about the 2nd section, and more of the kind of smaller poems. Um, things like my grandmother's sewing notions on 44 and once on 45 and war story 47. And there's another one. Oh yeah, Thanksgiving Eve and then sevens on page 55. And just the kind of interplay of a handful of shorter poems throughout the book. How'd you make the decisions about those? I mean, or how do you see them working in relation to some of the longer ones?
You know what, Jeff, I'm not sure that I actually thought of it that way. They were just some poems that I had written about my family and had written about my parents, and they all just seemed to go together in that section. So yeah, I don't know. It's funny how readers will see things in your work that you can't see yourself. So I'm finding that to be true so much. Yeah. Oh, and I should just say real quick, I'm in bed, but that's only because we are keeping our daughter's dog and he's next to me because he's nervous. And
Is
so
that-
we got in the bed so he'd feel okay. So
Is that Nurse Cooper,
that's
Marianne?
Nurse Cooper. Yes. Kathleen. Yes.
I love Nurse Cooper.
Well,
But
no
anyway,
worries.
but anyway, Jeff, I'm not sure that I thought too much about the smaller poems or the shorter poems working in relationship to the others with much with much planning or conscious thought. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know that I haven't thought deeply about it myself necessarily, but I did find myself, especially in this book, attracted to some of those smaller poems. I don't know if it's because they compare, given their placement next to some of the others, that they leave me wanting more, or they don't really explain much. They just kind of present something, and you're going, "Oh, I'm not falling in love with it." Like this is it's understated. Maybe the poems have an understatement about them, and it really works to have some of that. It's what was it, Sharon? You said if the book is a country music song.
The second section is the bridge.
Yeah, the second section is the bridge.
Yeah.
And so maybe some of these smaller poems within that vocalization, are a different kind of note to hit. I'm butchering this metaphor, I'm sure, but I'm really happy about butchering it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, Sharon, about the whole book being a country music song. That's really interesting. Yeah.
I too was really drawn by the smaller poems, and your opening poem in the second section, I could hear my grandmother's voice saying, "Don't go to that carnival and ride the rides. And you can't dance and play cards."
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I had that kind of grandmother. She was real bossy and real, you have to act this way, you have to wear this thing, you have to,
That's my mother. My mother. My grandmothers both died long before I was born. So I guess my mother thought she had to take that role on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And especially if you're going to church, like you gotta.
I mean, I'm so old. We didn't go downtown in shorts. You can't go downtown in shorts.
No, no. And we would actually, if you went to town, you did dress up, I can remember picking up my other grandmother, my paternal grandmother, on election day. We'd pick her up so that she could vote, and she dressed like she was going to church to go to the polls, She'd wear a hat, she'd wear a suit, a Sunday dress, and yeah, so but in the 60s we wore our dresses really, really short, and And as a teenager, you didn't think anything about it because everyone's dress was that short, but it drove my grandmother crazy. It drove her crazy.
But did you turn the waistband when you got out of the house? You could flip your waistband a couple of times, make the skirt even shorter.
I'm
Oh,
sure you didn't do that. You just heard about it, right?
yeah. Well, my mother made most of my clothes, so she was on my side because she'd make them the length that I wanted. So my grandmother's jabs were as much about towards me as they were towards my mother. So
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
What I love, especially in section 3, is you just have some killer last lines. In Map Maker, please sketch a map that we can sing. And then in Put Upon by Grief, send us a feather. I just loved a lot of you really close the deal at the end.
thank you. I had a lot of help with that. I workshopped these poems, and that was a comment that I got consistently, was that the poem doesn't have an ending, so in revision, I went back and worked really hard on some of those. So
How long did it take you to write the book and put it together?
I don't know, 40 years.
I know what you mean.
Once I got the poems written, it took me about a year to put them together. And then the manuscript went around for a couple of years without any bites so it was a really long process, really long. But I guess, I've been writing a lot of these poems my whole life. And I used to worry that, "Oh, I'm just writing the same thing over and over and over again." But very recently, I've heard really seasoned poets say that, and that's okay, that we have these particular moments and we go back to them, and we go back to them, and we go back to them, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I heard Diane Seuss say very recently that she writes about her father dying when she was in the 2nd grade. She writes about growing up in rural Michigan, about her mother being a single parent, and that's in every single one of her books. And that's true. She keeps going back to that event that marked her. So
I've also heard, write your signature poem and then write it again and again.
yeah.
And it makes you think, what would your signature poem be? Just which one is it? And but it's very, you can tell tons of work went into this. Even just the way you put the words on the page. Sometimes you have couplets, sometimes you have, river. One of the poems, the one about the heron, I think, is like a river, and the contrapuntal poem in the beginning, and even the contrapuntal list in the beginning. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe there are a lot of signature poems that someone can write. It's not just one.
Right.
And Marianne, I'm sure you'll figure this out as well, that when you have a book, you have to kind of let matter what matters to the people to whom it matters. And sometimes it'll be a poem that you go, these are the ones I'm going to read if I give a reading. And then somebody throws out one that you go, well, that wouldn't have been on my list. But
Right.
for them, it's the poem that they read all the other poems through the lens of this one. And it actually teaches, it's like, man, that's really interesting. And I love to look at books that way. I love to look at your book through the lens of every poem. The little poem 7s, which I love on page 55. I'll read your poem, I guess. My friend claims she saw her mom skipping away to heaven right after she died. I did not see mine dance, though her voice follows me around her house as I shovel out her things. Don't touch that. I need that, please. And what I think of when I'm reading that poem is that line break with the word voice. Sandy is our line break aficionado. She's like seizes in on the line breaks. But that particular line break, I think, is fascinating because it really calls to mind how much of this book, not that we needed reminding, but so much of it is about voice. And there's all the voices of country music, but then the way that the voices play against each other, the male voice, female voice, grandmother voice, speaker voice, mountain voice, voice of the church. There are all these different kinds of voices, and that kind of vocalizations. I mean, there's actually a poem called Vocal School,
Mhm.
and then even right next to it is War Story, which we talked about briefly, and what gets voiced in that poem. And it's just, I like the word voice in this book.
And
Let's see
also
what-
in the third section, it becomes nature's voice, the voice of birds.
Mm,
Right.
One of my favorite poems is ballads, in that first poem in the third section.
Thank you, KB.
mhm.
That's just, the imagery is gorgeous. It is in all of this, all of your writing, and it harkens back to to that first poem, Rank Stranger, and also to the other one about the herons on the
Holston.
And yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
I know, just not just because the heron, it's just the whole idea of the beauty, and I mean, I can feel it. Normally poems are so much about sight, we forget to use the other senses, but you open up with, sycamores jut above a daybreak wet with steam, and I feel that heat. I feel that. And I just
Plus,
think,
that's just a great line as an open line. I mean, that's the one you repeat to yourself. Sycamores jut above a daybreak wet. Sycamores jut above a daybreak wet. It's like, what a great line.
it is. I feel it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
The-
that's an interesting, go ahead. Go ahead, Marianne.
I was just going to say that the comment about the herons on the Holston, it is true that my mother and I did a lot of bird watching while she was in the nursing home in East Knoxville, which was on the Holston River. Her nursing home really sat right on the Holston River. But my teacher and my friend for 35 years, Danny Marianne, also lived on the Holston River. And when I would go to visit him, we would sit on his tiny little back porch and we could just watch birds, fish, and we saw herons and kingfisher and egrets and cormorants and all kinds of birds, depending on the season. And the thing that's made me the saddest about this book is that Danny never got to see it. He died before it, I think it had gone to press, and he knew about it, but he didn't get to see it. And so I was thinking about Danny too when I wrote that book, and just watching the river, and watching birds fly. So sorry, Sandy, I know I interrupted you.
No, that was interesting. What I was going to ask you, we talked about this before you got here, but about the way Rank Stranger as the poem outside of the sections, the beginning poem of the book, how it works as intro to all the sections and how it speaks through and to the sections. And we had our ideas, but I would love for you to kind of comment on that. How do you see that working?
Well, I thought that I thought it could be sort of a journey poem into the book, because the speaker's actually taking a journey, and the speaker is actually going from one place back home. And I also, so I've thought of it as just a journey poem, a way to read about a journey, and that we're getting ready to take one in this book. And I hadn't really thought about, Sandy, about how it opens up the 3 sections. I hadn't really thought about that at all. So
Well,
that's really interesting to me.
Well, like in the first stanza, follow me out of the Jewel City alongside the words of the poet. Follow me, the words of the poet. Like that to me was like, okay, we're to follow. We're following the words of this poet through this book. We really like that poem, by the way.
And hitting, you mentioned hit the highway toward home.
One of the things we talked about earlier was how many references to the country songs and old folk songs that you did. And how did you decide on what ones you were focusing on in this? How did you incorporate them and research them?
I'm so sorry, I've gotten strangled. Are you talking about particular songs or particular performers?
Particular songs.
Probably, I keep a list of, songs and lyrics and things I want to, just remember. Like I'm currently working right now on trying to incorporate into a poem the lyrics from a Jimmy Martin song. And the lyrics are, I've been a hobo and a tramp. My soul has done been stamped. I love that. My soul has done been stamped. So I keep a list. And so, that's one way. And I just thought about how I could maybe use some country music songs as titles, because you don't really have to get permission from the from the the copyright holders to use them that way. The Patsy Cline poem, for instance, I couldn't get permission to include the actual letter in the poem. So the original poem included part of the letter that Patsy Cline had written to this tailor about the kind of suits she wanted him to make and what she wanted them to be made out of, red satin and silver satin and rhinestones and all this thing. But I couldn't get permission to use that letter. Marty Stewart owns the letter, and his manager wouldn't return my calls or my emails. And so I couldn't get permission to use it. So I had to rewrite that poem, and I almost took it out. I thought, I can't rewrite this poem without that letter in there, but I just did it. I worked really hard at it. So it's kind of a different poem than how it started out, but mostly from notes, Sharon, just keeping notes of songs I wanted to incorporate. And I write down the lyrics of gospel songs, and I never use them in poetry. I like gospel music a lot more than I like religion, but I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but
that's the opening line of this poem. that's a doozy.
Yeah. So so I just write down a lot of lyrics,
So you grew up listening to country music, obviously very familiar with some of the country music stars of the day, Dolly Parton and Little Jimmy Dickens and the Carter family. So they must have influenced you and really, I don't know, they spoke to you in a really deep way to show up in these poems. Who's responsible for your kind of introduction to country music? Was it your grandmother's?
No, my parents
Parents?
listened only to country music, and there was this big country music radio station in Knoxville, WIBK. It's still on the air. And they had this morning DJ that my mother loved. He did all kinds of voices and he was funny. And so my daddy would get up real early in the mornings. And so my first memories is not so much seeing something, but smelling and hearing things. Like I would smell mother making breakfast for daddy, and I would hear the radio. And sometimes they would sing, and together, or one of them would sing, and that's all they listened to. And we watched it on television too. We watched the Porter Wagner show. We watched the Wilburn Brothers show. We watched 2 or 3 other. We watched Flat and Scruggs on television. That's the first time I ever saw Maybelle Carter. I saw her on Flat and Scruggs. But my parents also had gone, when they were dating, they worked at a department store in downtown Knoxville. And on their lunch break, they could go across the street. There was a live radio show called the Midday Merry-Go-Round. And they would go to that sometimes. It was a radio show, but there was a live audience. And mother talks about seeing Maybelle Carter with her young daughters. The Carter family had split up, of course, but Maybelle was traveling with June and Anita and Helen, her daughters. And they had this young guitar player who just started with them. It was Chet Atkins. And they went to country music shows when I was a kid. My grandmother would come and babysit with me. Me and my sister, and mother and daddy would go to the Coliseum and see country music shows. It's the only thing they ever spent money on.
Wow.
Because we didn't have it, but they would buy a few records, and they would save up, and they'd go to these shows.
Cool.
Did they sing them together, the songs sometimes, your parents?
Yes. And daddy always sang in the car. Always, always, always.
I did too.
He knew the words, to all of the songs. They knew a lot about country music, and it wasn't that they were big readers or, they just listened and they paid attention, and they just knew a lot, and they passed that on.
And yet also what enters into that first section is a little bit of like feminism, like a awareness of how women were treated, like the Girl Singer, the title poem, and Barn Dance. What made you include that kind of subject matter in this section?
I had gotten a fellowship to study those women at Berea College through the Appalachian Sound Archives. And in the archives, they had letters, they had radio programs, they had oral histories, they had witness histories, they had all kinds of stuff you wouldn't believe. And I learned really quickly that the women were not in charge of their own careers. I mean, that's the reason Dolly Parton left Porter Wagner. She said, okay, I can do this by myself. I don't need you. But see, it took until 68, 69 for her to do that. So the men were the managers, and sometimes their managers were their husbands or their brothers, sometimes their fathers. And the women were given names that they usually didn't get to pick. They had to wear these hokey costumes, of course, old-timey costumes with lace-up shoes. And they were told what to say on stage. I mean, Lily Mae Ledford came from Powell County, Kentucky, and went to Chicago to be on the National Barn Dance. And right away, she learned that she was not going to have any control over her music, because they made her quit playing the banjo, or they made her quit playing the fiddle, and wanted her to play the banjo. She loved the fiddle. She wanted to play the fiddle. They wouldn't know. You can't play the fiddle. You got to play the banjo. and you got to dress up like you were born in the 19th century, and you're going to be part of a band called the Coon Creek Girls. And, she did get to keep her name, but all the other women who were in that band got flower names like Lily, Daisy, Rose, and there was another name, I forget, a flower name, So that infuriated me,
Mhm.
because thinking about my grandmothers, both of my grandmothers were widowed very young. My parents were both very young when their fathers died, and they never remarried. And they always just said, I can solve this problem by myself. I don't need a man. I don't need anybody to help me. And they just did it, My grandmother Worthington walked out on her husband. And after her kids were grown, said, I'll see you. I'm leaving. I'm moving to Knoxville. Oh, and by the way, I've saved enough money to buy 2 houses. And she did. She bought one house that she lived in, and she rented the upstairs, and the other house was a rental house.
Wow.
I know. She'd been saving money a long time.
Wow. That's something.
Yeah.
So who is the girl singer? Is the girl singer a particular person?
Well, no, the girl singer is sort of a composite singer, but I'll tell you, she was really inspired by something I saw, an old clip of a country music show with Jeannie Seeley, who was a Grand Ole Opry star in the 60s. She was a beautiful woman. She was married to Jack Green. I'll tell you a crude story in just a minute that Lee Smith told me once about Jeannie Seeley, if you want to hear it. But it involves, it does involve a crudeness. So if you're sensitive about that, I won't tell it. But anyway, Jeannie Seeley had this big hit song. It was called Don't Touch Me. And so the man at the microphone is going to introduce her, except he's got his hands all over her, and he's making fun of the title of the song, Don't Touch Me. Oh, I'm going to touch you. I'm going to touch you. And she's just taking it all so good-hearted, and she's just being such a good sport. And I'm thinking, I bet she wants to smack him, and I just thought, that is just awful, how they were all those women were manhandled, and, so that's kind of that. She's kind of the inspiration, but it's not really about her.
But I think the poet is the girl singer as well.
I hope so, sort of, because I can't sing very well. So,
I was going to ask you, do you have a musical background, or did you sing?
I do, but it's mostly playing piano and organ. I was a church musician almost my whole life. Yeah. But not so much singing. I mean, I can carry a tune, but not, yeah. Okay, so do you want to hear the crude Jeannie Seeley story?
Yes, of course we do. Yeah.
Okay, so Lee Smith, the novelist, was working on her novel called The Devil's Dream, which is I don't know if you've ever read it, but it is really a fictionalized version of the history of country music. It's a beautiful book. So she went to Nashville to meet all these people while she was working on this book. And she met Jeannie Seeley, and Jeannie Seeley took her around backstage at the Grand Ole Opry and, told her all these things. And so this is what Jeannie Seeley told her. Now, this comes from Lee Smith, who I don't doubt, but Jeannie Seeley said to Lee Smith, and I quote, I figured out who to fuck to get on the Opry, but I couldn't figure out who to fuck to get off the Opry. And Lee put that in the book. Lee had her main character say that in the book. So that's my crude Jeannie Seeley story. I know, isn't it great? Yeah.
Oh gosh.
We were going to ask her about the cover.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't it wonderful?
Did you have input? Did you pick this, or did that press?
No, the cover was drawn by an intern at the press, a college student who is now, they've hired her to be she's graduated and she's now working for the press. She's an artist. I'll show you, I don't know if I can share my screen or not, but I'll show you an image real quick. If I can hang on just a second. My mother had a home movie of Dolly Parton, and I was able to have that movie digitized. And the person who digitized it, and I might show you another movie, another picture in just a second. The person who digitized it put the Dolly stuff, made it into kind of a video. Oh, here it is. Oh, I can't share the screen. It's, I think you have to make me a host, Sandy.
Oh. Do I know how to do that? I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah, if you go to the participants
Participants.
and you go over to the, I think if you go over, if you mouse over to more, you should be able to make me one.
Participants. It's not one of my options.
Oh, okay. There, I think if you mouse over where that little camera icon is, do you not get a more option?
When you have the list of participants.
Yeah, when you have the list of participants up. Well,
Okay,
anyway,
Okay. Make host.
yeah,
I'm changing you to be the host then.
okay,
Okay.
yes.
You're the host now. There you go.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
So there's Dolly. She's about 15 years old. And you see that outfit she's got on. So I
Mhm.
sent the artist that picture.
Just
That's
like it.
Yeah, so she made the little Peter
Wow.
Pan collar, and she kind of used that as inspiration. Of course, the cover's not Dolly, but you know, the
That's cool.
yeah, it's
But
really
there's a commonality in the facial expression even.
yeah. Yeah. But that's kind of the inspiration for the photograph. So I sent the you know, you do have some input. They wanted to know, you know, what kind of art I liked and graphics and that sort of thing. And I sent them a whole lot of pictures of anonymous women with guitars. But I also sent that picture. It's so grainy because, you know, it was taken from an old 1960s home movie. But I love what she did with it. I just think
Yeah, we like it too.
I got really lucky with the cover, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
You'll
I
have to
also like the font was easily read.
Yeah.
And it's interesting the way it kind of forms the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's interest in that too.
Yeah.
Your name's kind of small.
Well, that's all right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I really enjoyed reading it.
Yeah, it
Thank
was
you.
really good read.
Mhm.
but you-
Thank you all so much.
I was curious about, oh, ballads in your life. Oh, partially, you had the Knoxville ballad, but there's such a thin line between country music and ballad tradition.
Right.
So would you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, one of the things I've sort of been always obsessed with, even as a kid, was murder ballads, which is a bad thing to be obsessed with, but I was, and they scared me because, I thought Knoxville Girl was a real song, a true story, that someone had thrown a woman off the Gay Street Bridge, or, the Henley Street Bridge in Knoxville. Um, and I was kind of obsessed with those. I didn't really understand too much though about the ballad tradition until I got to college and studied ballads. And then when I studied about the girl singers in the archives at Berea College, I learned so much about the ballad collectors and the whole idea of going into the mountains and recording these songs. And that was just yet another form of exploitation of the mountain singers. I mean, these women, and they were mostly women who kept the tradition and knew the songs. I mean, they weren't working in the coal mines and they weren't working for the timbermen, but they were still exploited, because even though they might have been given credit, but the ballad collectors were usually not mountain people. And so they didn't understand their culture. They thought they were all ignorant. They thought they couldn't read. They thought they couldn't, that they were all married to their cousins, and, all the stereotypes.
Yeah.
A lot of the stereotypes that developed about mountain people started with those ballad collectors, which is bad. For instance, Cecil Sharp, who was the famous English person, the British man who came to the States to collect ballads in the early 1900s, he came with his assistant, Maud Carpellis, and she was really responsible for, writing down everything. She should be the one that we remember, not him. But he would not go to Sylva, North Carolina. They got on the train to go to Sylva. They were going to collect some ballads in Sylva. When the train stopped, Cecil Sharp saw Black people and stayed on the train.
Hmm.
Would not get off the train. So, I mean, the stereotypes, some of them started because of the ballad collectors, and they were fierce competitors. They wanted to get their collections published and published first. And so there's a woman at Berea who's just recently written a book about Catherine Jackson French, who was a ballad collector. And she grew up in London, Kentucky. She was one of the first women to ever get a PhD in America. And when her mother got sick, she came back to London to take care of her mother. And she went up into the mountains to collect ballads. And, she had this way into this community. First of all, she was a woman and she knew a lot of these people because she'd been raised there. But when she presented her collection to be published, nobody would publish it because she was a woman and she had done this all on her own, and she hadn't been accompanied by a male. She couldn't get male support. It's a really ugly story, Her name was Catherine Jackson French. I forget what the woman's name is that wrote the book very recently. It was just published like a couple of years ago, but the University Press of Kentucky published it, about her life and about not ever getting her collection published. So it was competitive, it was male driven, and it was, they did a lot of the stereotyping, which doesn't really answer your question, Alice, but there's not a whole lot of difference between the ballads and country music. The same themes come up: murder, drinking, betrayal, infidelity. There's just not 25 verses in a country music song the way there is in a typical ballad.
That would be unbearable. for there to be 25 verses in a
Yeah.
country music song.
Yeah, but you know, the blood and the gore and the infidelity and the drinking and all of that is still, you know, part of country music. Although I must say, I have a very limited view of country music. My definition of country music doesn't go much past 1970. You know, I mean, after that, you know, I don't pay maybe 1980, you know. Once Garth Brooks and came, it was all over for me. That was it. You know, I gave it up. Yeah. Although I am really, really glad to see a lot of women, and especially a lot of Black women, sort of making their way into country music.
Yeah.
Reese Palmer, Yola, Valerie June, Mickey Guyton. There's a lot of Black women who are saying, you know, we can do this too. And some of that is because Rhiannon Giddens has worked so hard to
Oh, man.
educate us.
Man, she's a
Yeah,
And what a voice.
I know. And what a smart woman. And, you know, I don't know if you've ever seen her in concert, but she's always a teaching artist. You know, she's a great performer, but almost every single song in the American canon you can trace back to enslaved peoples, you know. And of course white people co-opted that and stole all that and, you know, used it for their benefit. So I'm really glad that that's happening in country music. I'm for anything that will take down the bro country movement, because I'm done with that. Yeah.
Oh, and let me
And
put
I-
in a plug. Oh, the Nashville Ballet, if any of you guys are getting out between the 18th and the 26th of March, they're redoing Lucy Redux that took Carolyn Williams' poems
Yes.
and Giddings and Turi and what's his name? Teresi Franco are apparently going to be here and play again with the ballet,
Wow.
because I heard it. I went to it when it premiered, and
Uh-huh.
it's just incredible. It's so if you've got spare time and don't mind a trip to Nashville,
I never mind a trip to Nashville.
When I was first, my first real job was like in 1987, 88, somewhere around in there. I was the weekend DJ for a country music station. And I remember being told very distinctly not to play two women back to back because there weren't enough women. So we had to space them out. So I had to make sure not to play Reba McEntire right after, you know, some other, other woman. And when I say that now to people, they go, really? That's just so weird. And that was just, you know, that wasn't that long ago. I mean, it was,
No,
it wasn't.
no, it wasn't. Yeah.
but the other thing I wanted to ask you about ballads was how you researched the background on Tom Dooley.
Different places, really. And nobody really knows what happened to Lori Foster. I mean, Tom Dooley did take the blame and was hanged because of that crime, but there are a lot of scholars who think that he didn't really do the deed, that it was those other two women, and it was probably Annie, although Pearline might have done some of it too. So it's really interesting that nobody really knows who actually killed Lori Foster. But Tom Dooley did step up and take the blame. Yeah. So I just did, you know, I looked in different places. I read a lot of books. I looked online. I looked at historical societies. There's all kinds of places to look at, and all kinds of scholars in that part of North Carolina where their research is online. You can access it pretty easily. Yeah. I looked at Sharon McCrum's book, her novel about
The Ballad of Frankie Silver? Is that the one?
No, it's not
Okay.
that one. It's one about Tom Dula. Yeah, but I can't remember what it's called.
Mm.
But anyway, that's what I did, Alice. I did a lot of
like those a
reading.
lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have a question for you about revision.
Uh-huh.
You're such a master at tightening things and getting great endings and great line breaks. What's your best advice for somebody to use in the revision process of their work?
I pay really close attention to line breaks. And sometimes I know that there aren't really any rules, hard and fast rules about line breaks, but I always, whenever I finish a poem, I just read the end words. And if they're what I call strong words, like it's not an article or a conjunction or a pronoun or a preposition, I try not to end on those. That's just me. I think a strong, so that's one part of the revision process, is to look at the end words. And also, how can I make this whole phrase one verb? How can I make this a verb? You know, like I think KB is really good at verbs. That's one of her strengths as a poet, is she knows how to use verbs. So when I'm revising, I think a lot about what would KB do? You know, she would come up with the right verb for this. She really would. So that's another thing. Instead of those adjective noun combinations, you know, sunny day or rainy day, how can I make that a verb? What can I do to make that a verb? So I'm always looking for that. And sometimes I'll keep a poem the way it is because I want it to be in a certain pattern. Like Jeff, you mentioned the Sevens poem earlier. That poem actually came from a prompt from I think it was Morris Manning, one of his workshops that I was in, where you write 7 lines and each line has 7 syllables.
Yeah.
You know, that's why it's called Sevens.
Yeah.
It's a lazy title. And so sometimes I won't change the line break, Sharon, or work to tighten it up because I want it to be in a particular form, or I want it to be, you know, I want it to look a certain way on the page. That's just a couple of things. Mostly it's agony. Don't y'all think it's agony to
Yeah.
revise?
For
Mm-mm.
sure.
No, no,
You don't? I
No.
think
it's thrilling.
it's.
And that might sound like I'm being facetious, and I'm not. I mean, to me, revision is it's just fun.
Well, when you look at your first draft, when you finally gotten to the end and a draft you like, and then you look back at your first one and you think it's like a 17-year-old wrote it or something.
Right. Or the dog wrote it, you know. Yeah. But you know, when you finally get that draft out, I don't know if y'all feel this way, but it's like, oh man, that's so good. That's so good, you know?
Yeah.
And you're right. And then you go back and you look at it, it's like, yeah, the dog must have, you know, gotten a hold of the pen.
Anybody have any other questions? Well, we would love, Marianne, if you would read us a poem. Do you have a particular poem that you would like to read, or does someone want to ask for a particular poem?
Let's see. I'll read Pentecost. I like Pentecost. Oh, and am I still the host?
No, I took it back.
I was gonna show you another picture.
Oh, do you want me to give it back to you? I can do that.
Okay, yeah, let me pull it up real quick.
You're it now.
Okay.
Ah,
Mm.
Okay, so this is the Axeman's bicycle. And I know you probably have these same sorts of people that you saw growing up. Maybe they walked all over town, or maybe they you just saw them and you didn't really know their story. I saw this man all the time. He rode this bicycle, and I don't know his story. There was another man in my neighborhood. This man was mostly in my grandmother's neighborhood where I would see him, but that's his bicycle.
Mhm.
So just so you have a kind of a visual of his get up. Okay, Pentecost 1965. First Creek churns under the Fifth Avenue Viaduct in the old part of town. Brick warehouses testify to a Sunday shifting toward a lazy haze. Summer is coming. The girl watches for the Axeman riding his bicycle down Central Avenue. He's duct taped plastic sheets to dowels, built a shelter so he can ride in all weathers. She likes to read his hand-scrawled signs fixed to his bike tent, verses from the Acts of the Apostles. At church, the preacher could call him a witness for Jesus, but the Axeman is black and poor, ignored, even though we all see him every day. He pedals down Magnolia Avenue like it's the road to Damascus. The preacher cries about tongues of fire and a mighty rushing wind, but the green branches sway easy when the Axeman passes. After church, the girls' great feast will be killed lettuce and onions, side meat and skillet cornbread set atop a formica table. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place.
Mhm.
So I hope I get to see the Axeman someday.
Yeah,
Maybe in the afterlife.
we like that poem too.
Thank you.
Beautiful collection, really fantastic.
Yes,
Thank you so much.
great book. And thank you so much, Marianne, for dropping by and talking with us.
Thank
Yeah.
you for talking about my book. I'm really honored. I appreciate it so much.
And
was
congratulations.
fun.
Yeah,
Thank you.
congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations. Yes.
Good to see you. I'll leave you all.
All right,
Okay.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
thank you.
That was great. I love
Oh my
her.
gosh, what a
Yeah.
wonderful woman.
Okay, next month we have Christian Collier, The Gleaming of the Blade. And this is this book only has 32 pages.
Yeah. Are you going to call him to come and visit?
I think that I will call him to come, yes.
Yeah, he would love that.
Yeah. Should be good. So we'll do that. And then May, it's going to be Bonfire Opera. And the poet is, I can't remember her name.
Lamaris,
Danusha
Danusha. Yeah.
Lamaris, yeah.
Wow.
So that's April and May we got coming up.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Sandy. Jeff,
Yes.
thank
Yeah.
you. Good to see
Yes.
you.
Thank you guys for coming. It was fun.
It
Thanks
was
for
Sandy.
Thank you.
Bye.
We'll see you next month.
All right.
And apologies for the crisis of the kid and food.
No worries. It's all good.
Take care.
Yeah, see you.
Bye, Alice.
Good night.
Good night, Sharon. Hey, Jeff, real quick.
Yeah, you can stop recording, I guess.
Speaking of food,